everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We all have our reasons why we are on this track. Oh, we all have our burdens, yeah, but we just keep on fighting and we never look back. Here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for. This is what we know. Here we come back to life, we're still breathing. Standing up, everybody's gonna see it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. Even if we fall, we will rise up and we follow the path that we believe in. No, we're not gonna stop until we reach it. Oh, all you need to know is that we're holding on. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. We rise up from the dust and claim our throne. When you feel it's hopeless, when you think that you lost, oh, I will take your hand and we'll
Started here. Welcome. Thank you for coming in, Vesper. Glad to see you. So let me start right off by showing you the cover of this book. So apparently, this Alec McClellan has written several books on Hollow Earth. This happens to be one I've already got in electronic format, so that's what I'm going with. Excuse me. All right. The Hollow Earth Enigma. Okay, there is a quote to start off with. This coincidence between, or coincidence in this context, I think, is the better pronunciation for it, between scientific arrogance and a new social trend illustrates an important fact in our society. While science consistently refuses to consider phenomena that lie outside the safe regions of its current understanding, the public is eagerly reaching for explanations that fit its experience. That is Jacques Vallée from Dimensions. I assume that's a book or a magazine. 1988. Okay, prologue. There is a one-page prologue here. So, this is an ancient. There is an ancient South American legend which relates that around 2,000 years ago, 4 brothers and 4 sisters emerged from a huge cavern that ran into the center of the earth. The eldest of the men climbed to the top of a mountain in what is now Peru, and taking up 4 stones, threw them to the 4 points of the compass. With this act he took possession of the land that lay within his stone's throw, and all those who lived there. He also laid the foundations of Cuzco, which in time would become the capital of the mighty Inca Empire. According to local tradition, these 8 men and women came from a subterranean world and gave to the people the skills in engineering, agriculture, arts and crafts, and the ability to organize their economy and social welfare, which made the Inca dynasty a marvel of pre Columbian America until it was destroyed by the Spanish invaders. The mysterious benefactors also left a message carved on a stone tablet, which has special significance for us in the dawn of the new millennium. It translates, when 2,000 years have passed, beneath the frozen waters, a new world will be discovered. The scholars who have studied the couplet suggest that the the reference to frozen waters most probably means the South Pole, and that the New World recalls a very old belief that an entrance to the fabled hollow earth lies there. If true, the prophecy holds out the prospect of at last of an answer to one of the greatest enigmas of history and especially of the world which mankind inhabits. That's the end of the prologue. And I'm interested in this just because why not? And also, when I was a kid, there was a comic book called Warlord, and it was all about Hollow Earth, um, which was interesting. He was a some kind of military. I don't remember the details of it, but I think he was in the military, and somehow he ended up in the Hollow Earth and um, became a warlord in this kind of medieval fantasy world inside the Earth. Which that's about all I remember about it, to be honest. But because it was many years ago. All right. So chapter 1, the subsurface world. The hollow earth theory was one of the first controversial scientific topics to interest Charles Fort, the American whose books about inexplicable events and phenomena led to the creation of the Fortean Society and indirectly hugely successful movies such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind and the TV series The X-Files. This indefatigable journalist who spent his life collecting weird and bizarre stories for which science had no ready explanation, was dismissed in some quarters as a crank who championed the most absurd theories. To others, like the English author Eric Frank Russell, he was, quote, the only real genius SF ever had. End quote. I don't know what SF is. I don't know. Uh, Fort who was born in 1874 and died in 1932, dedicated himself to trying to convince people that the world on which we live is a much stranger place than we realize. Although he had no scientific training and culled much of his material from books, newspapers, and journals, he believed that humans should be made aware of the undeniably improbable beliefs about the world they inhabited. A quick-witted but often cussed man, he regularly attacked the scientific establishment for dogmatically dismissing unconventional opinions, and ran afoul of the establishment for what some saw as alarmist theories that we might all be the property of omniscient aliens. At the age of 43, Fort was suddenly freed from the need to work when he came into a legacy, and thereafter threw himself wholeheartedly into his investigations. The result was a series of groundbreaking works, including The Book of the Damned, 1919, New Lands, 1923, and Wild Talents, 1932, which have subsequently assured his reputation. It was early on in his research into strange science that Fort first came across references to the Hollow Earth enigma. This immediately excited his interest as a subject worthy of study, and he began planning a work entitled Why, the letter Y, to investigate the story. Although sadly he never completely finished or published the manuscript. In it, he started piecing together the main threads of the legend which he discovered had been recorded since biblical times and even earlier. The facts, as he learned them, were that the interior of our planet is actually hollow and may have been inhabited since time immemorial. Some accounts he came across suggested that these subterranean people could be the survivors of the lost continents of Atlantis or Mu, who had fled to the underground world when their lands were inundated. Like others drawn to the remarkable story, Fort learned that investigators had reached the conclusion that the Earth was donut-shaped, rather like the Van Allen belts surrounding the planet, and there were a number of theories as to why it was not solid, as science claimed, but hollow with a central sun, and its own hospitable atmosphere and climate. At the north and south poles there were believed to be giant holes leading to this world, holes anywhere between 800 to 1400 miles in diameter at their widest points, curving through a crust of about 900 miles with a gap of about 300 miles at the narrowest point. Through these, a sea or air explorer might gain entry. Inside lay a subterranean paradise of oceans and land masses, as well as rich and fertile countryside able to sustain plant, animal, and human life, almost an inverted mirror image of our own world. By contrast, the scientific textbooks which Fort consulted told him that the Earth was a solid oblate spheroid with an equatorial diameter of 7,926 miles and its polar dimension of 7,900 miles. It was thought to consist of an inner core extending to about 800 miles from the center, possibly consisting of solid iron and nickel, an outer core about 1,400 miles thick, possibly of molten iron and nickel, and a mantle of solid rock about 1,800 miles thick, separated from the outer crust and varying in thickness from 3 to 5 miles. The area of land surface of the Earth amounted to 57 million square miles, with over 139 million square miles of seafloor. The planet was estimated to weigh 6 sextillion tons. The more he read, the more Fort became convinced, as other Hollow Earth researchers have been before and since, that there still had to be an immense region underneath that was completely unknown. He challenged, quote, the conceit and competence of scientists, end quote, agreeing with another suggestion that if the Earth was a solid sphere, it would surely weigh much more than 6 sextillion tons. It seems likely that the core region, which science could not fully explain, might well have a radius of as much as 2,200 miles, more than enough to accommodate, say, the Moon, which had a diameter of 2,160 miles. So what could possibly exist there? Charles Fort noted all the legends and theories he could find in his manuscript, retelling them in the same highly individualistic style that became his hallmark, a mixture of impressive amounts of data with the occasional direct statement, although he was always prepared to admit that some of the material he utilized might be dubious scientifically speaking. Fort never deviated from his conviction that there was a kind of unity in all things, even apparently the most unrelated facts. It might seem crazy to some people to learn that the world was, after all, hollow, but there was still a lot of evidence to support the concept, and if this was the case, it provided an explanation for so many of the phenomena he had gathered. The books by Charles Fort, which led to the inauguration of the Fortean Society to continue his work, and later a monthly magazine, Fortean Times, have also encouraged subsequent generations of writers to approach all manner of unlikely concepts in an unprejudiced way. People like Graham Hancock, recently described by the Sunday Times as, quote, the Indiana Jones of alternative archaeology, end quote, whose best-selling books include Fingerprints of the Gods, 1995, which has sold almost 4 million copies. I think it's way beyond that now. And the TV series Quest for the Lost Civilization, 1998, which made him into a household name. In particular, Hancock has proposed the theory that an unknown and highly advanced civilization which was destroyed in a global cataclysm at the end of the last ice age around 10,500 BC may have been responsible for the origins of cultures as far apart as Egypt, Peru, Mexico, and Cambodia. The former East African correspondent has certainly brought to light many remarkable facts about ancient wonders, such as the megaliths of Britain and France and the great edifices of South America, as well as discovering near the Japanese island of Yonaguni an extraordinary submerged pyramid structure which is believed to have been above sea level over 10,000 years ago. Yet, remarkable as these discoveries and his conclusions are, I wonder why he has missed or overlooked the possibility that the cultural influence of which he speaks might well have been that of people who fled to the Hollow Earth, or indeed originated there. Hancock's books are very much in the same tradition as those of the quote unquote founding fathers, and the latest phase of interest in alternative science, the Swiss writer Erich von Daniken and the American Charles Berlitz. Berlitz became famous with his international bestseller and about unexplained disappearances, The Bermuda Triangle, 1975, and has recently touched on the subject of the Hollow Earth in his World of Strange Phenomena, 1990. I don't know how old this book is. I forgot to look. But the way he's talking, I bet it came out in around 2000-ish. Quote, belief in a hollow earth surfaces in many cultures around the world, and adherents of the theory point out that many things in nature, bones, pits, fruits, and animals, for example, are structured around an inner cavity. Therefore, it's logical to assume that the earth is as well, end quote. And I'm not sure that's totally logical, but whatever. Erich von Daniken also arrived on the scene with a worldwide bestseller, Chariots of the Gods, which I will read on this stream at some point, 1969, in which he set out to prove that the Earth had been visited by space travelers both before and after the dawn of recorded history. Recently, however, he has shifted his study from the heavens to the earth itself and believes the answer to what lies in the subsurface world may actually be found by a more accessible route than through the polar apertures. In an interview in Encounters magazine in April 1998, he suggested that there may be an entrance to the subterranean world via the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt. Quote, there are many secrets still to be uncovered in the pyramids, he said. For example, there is an unexplored tunnel shaft which my friend Rudolf Gattenbrink and I investigated in 1993 with the aid of a specially developed 37-centimeter long robot camera. It revealed a shaft no human eyes have seen for at least 4,500 years, at the end of which is an ancient doorway. With the use of a laser, Gattenbrink was able to show that this leads to further unexplored space. Could this be the entrance to the subterranean world which has been talked about for thousands of years? End quote. Von Daniken believes the question will only be answered when the ancient doorway is opened. At the time of writing, this seems an unlikely possibility due to the skepticism of both the Egyptian authorities and a number of leading Egyptologists who do not share his attitude, or that of Charles Fort or Charles Berlitz, or any of their ilk for that matter, towards unconventional science, insisting that there is nothing there. What all these writers have done, however, is help to promote interest in the mystery of the hollow earth. Thus prepared, I hope the reader is ready to embark on a quest for knowledge that takes us back to the very birth of our planet. And just as a side note, those famous Egyptologists, they have one of them, and I can't think of his name right off the top of my head. He is like the head Egyptologist. Um, he has actually announced major discoveries and then turned around and denied it, and like very soon after, he's on film actually announcing things like the shaft that goes down through the back of the Sphinx. Um, he announced it. He showed the opening to it, and then he completely changed his story 180. Said it's a hoax, or not a hoax. He said it never existed. He never said anything like it. He just basically tried to gaslight everybody into believing he never said it. But he's on film saying it. So anyway, just an aside. Almost 5 billion years ago, the Earth was just an enormous ball of hot, whirling gases, slowly cooling. According to the laws of physics, cooling gases condense, thereby allowing the ball, which would become our planet, to coalesce as the heat evaporated. This process, physicists believe, continued in a spiraling whirl so that the self centered force of gravity gradually reduced the gases until approximately 2,800 million years ago, 2.8 billion, they finally became a solid sphere. Such is the solid Earth concept, and indeed, the study of core samples from the deep drilling does seem to substantiate this, although these drillings have only penetrated to limited depths. Tests have also shown that the temperatures within the Earth increase the deeper the drilling goes, although again, this is true only to the depths that have so far been tapped. Therefore, traditional science argues it seems safe to assume that our world is solid from surface to core. But is it? Although this theory is generally accepted for the celestial evolution of huge bodies like stars, it is arguably not the last word in the creation of typical planets, such as the Earth. Indeed, a quick investigation of centrifugal force throws up an entirely different possibility. Gravity, we know, attempts to draw all material toward the center, while centrifugal force does the opposite. With this in mind, American Hollow Earth researcher Kate Malone has taken an everyday example to explain what she believes occurred in the creation of our world. Writing in Exposure Magazine, Volume 3, Number 2, she says, quote, "Science accepts the fact that the Earth spins on its axis. Centrifugal force makes the Earth bulge slightly at the equator and flatten at the poles. To visualize what the formation of the planet could look like, think of a washing machine. I think that's supposed to be formation of the planet. Think of a washing machine on a spin cycle. The clothing, gases, liquids, and particles are thrown outwards against the sides of the machine, gravity. The center portion remains clear. The hollow center is firmed. Thus, as the Earth has never stopped spinning, so this washing machine never gets out of spin cycle. If the machine continues to spin, will the water and clothes start clumping together in the middle, or will they endlessly spin around the hollow center?" End quote. It was this law of motion, centrifugal force, trying to thrust all the material outward from the developing Earth's axis of rotation that ultimately created a balance between the two vast natural forces, Malone explains, and the compromise between them resulted in a hollow, rotating sphere approximately 8,000 miles in diameter. There is even more conclusive evidence that for this, according to Mark Harp in his article, quote, "A Case for the Hollow Earth Theory," end quote, in Nexus Magazine, December 1994. Quote, I think, is this a quote? Yeah, it's a long quote. "There is a special characteristic of centrifugal force, and we must not overlook this important fact. The strength of C force becomes greatly lessened as it approaches right angles to the direction of spin. A simple day-to-day example of this behavior is water in a basin. If you move the drain plug and allow the water to start emptying from the basin, what will you eventually observe? A vortex or whirlpool, an empty space surrounded by rapidly rotating material. Now imagine this same principle concerning the contradicting body which was to become our Earth. At right angles to the rotational axis, in other words, the poles, the C force was considerably weaker than elsewhere, especially the equator. Therefore, although at the Earth's equator the C-force was able to halt the material's inward progress at about an 8,000 mile diameter, it was considerably less successful in the polar regions. There stopping the contraction at about 1,400 miles. The inevitable outcome of this natural compromise is that our planet concluded its evolution as an 8,000-mile hollow sphere with 1,400-mile diameter pole openings. End quote. So that all that both of those paragraphs were one quote. As a result of their study of astronomical records and photographs of nebulae and comets, Harp and other researchers have determined that at the precise center of these translucent spheres is a proportionally small incandescent ball. The large intervening space indicates that the nebula is also hollow, with a bright sphere at its center. This phenomenon, they believe, also occurs in the hollow Earth. For if the Earth was at one time a ball of fire and molten metal, some of this fire would remain at its center while the centrifugal force caused the rest of the matter to form a solid crust. The hollow Earth would thereby gain a fiery ball or sun at its center. Again, this can be demonstrated in a very straightforward way. We know that apart from at the poles, the centrifugal force of Earth is at its weakest in the precise center. This can be put to the test by sprinkling some white powder on the surface of a long playing record. As the record spins, the powder will be hurled to the edge of the surface, with the exception of a tiny portion left intact at the center. Thus we can see how the central sun probably came into existence to provide the inner world with light, heat, and the energy to sustain all forms of life. Another theory about the hollow Earth suggests this sun might be powered by nuclear fission rather than fusion like stars. It would only need to be a couple of hundred miles in diameter to weigh millions of tons and give enough light to the interior world, and because of its nuclear nature, this little globe would generate a magnetic field just like the sun. Seismologists, of course, prefer the explanation that the Earth's core is liquid, the argument being that certain waves can only travel through solid materials and not through liquids, gases, or a vacuum. There have been different views in the scientific community about this, however, especially in a suggestion that even if the core of the Earth is a molten ball, the mantle or overlaying mass of rock must have two distinct zones. One nearer the core, where heat and pressure put the solid rock in a state of flowage, quote unquote, and an upper zone where fracture can occur. The depth of this upper zone is the crucial point of the debate. Professor Frank D. Adams of Montreal University demonstrated not long ago by actual experiment that empty cavities might exist in granite at a depth of 11 miles, and his conclusions have been supported by the mathematician Louis V. King, who calculated that at normal temperature a cavity could exist at depths at depths down to between 17.2 and 20.9 miles. The recently discovered 16 Rousbelts, ROUS, which give planes of fracture completely penetrating the globe, offer additional support for the possibility. And another hollow Earth researcher, Jan Lamprecht, is, however, prepared to go much further in the discussion. As he explained recently in correspondence with the author, quote, scientists simply assume that the core is liquid. They do not explore the possibility that the core is a gas or even a vacuum. I have discovered that approximately 7,000 miles from an earthquake, you will find a shadow area where certain types of waves never appear. Could the core / hollow be blocking out these waves? Then at about 10,000 miles or so, these waves reappear. I also realized the complexity of such waves and how they are reflected, and saw that it is quite easy to misinterpret them. In fact, our methods of watching seismic waves leave much to be desired. When waves come up, we have no idea where they were. we really can't tell much, but look carefully and you can see a great many waves bouncing off the mantle. We are told this is due to a change in density. Keep in mind that a hollow object makes the wave movements many times more complex because waves bounce back and forth between the two thin crusts, and this will complicate the hell out of the whole thing. The Earth sometimes vibrates for an hour or two after a big quake. End quote. Researchers into the hollow Earth enigma have also cited a number of other anomalies which add to the mystery. Polar explorers, for example, have for generations commented on the unexpected warmer temperatures found in the most extreme northerly and southerly latitudes. Some of these temperatures have been calculated at anything up to 30 degrees warmer than they should be if the sun were the sole source of heat. The researchers have also found it difficult to accept the scientific explanation that it is warm equatorial air which is heating the poles, especially at such temperatures after the distance it has traveled. Warm air rising from the hollow Earth sun is their preferred explanation. The huge numbers of fish in the polar regions, far denser than in warmer areas, are another element in the puzzle, and it is hard to explain why birds and animals travel north for the winter unless they are seeking the warmth of the inner world, and just add to these the unpredictable behavior of radio waves at the north and south poles, a gravitational increase measurable at the polar curve which is sufficient to cause a marked segregation of salt water and fresh water, and the stones, bits of wood, dust, pollen, and mud frequently observed on icebergs, which are, of course, composed of fresh water, and which, despite the lack of annual rain to replace them, every year drift away to melt in their thousands on the polar seas. There are two further anomalies, one concerning the poles and the other the beautiful auroras associated with them. The fact is that there is no actual north or south pole, no single point on the map. That is, as tradition would have us believe. Both are merely 90 degrees latitude, and because it is assumed the Earth is a sphere, it is also assumed that only one spot in each hemisphere can provide a reading of 90 degrees latitude by the sun or any other heavenly body. The eccentric behavior of compasses in very high latitudes above the 80th parallel and the needle showing a vertical movement as the conflicting forces of magnetism and gravity manifest themselves are both well-known experiences. According to the Hollow Earth tradition, it is quite possible to travel into one of the polar openings by accident at a skew angle, remain upright, and journey for several hundred miles in and out again, and never know you have been there. In fact, the gravity is working as normal. I'm sorry, the fact that gravity is working as normal enables the traveler to remain upright even when, in relation to the outside world, he is upside down. Everything else, including the atmosphere approximately 30 miles high, as on the outside, the waters and winds would be just as normal, although it is believed there may well be a vacuum at the very center of both apertures. Come on, there we go. The aurora borealis and the aurora australis are phenomena that have fascinated and puzzled mankind for centuries. Hey, Ren Flames, thank you for coming back in again tonight. Um, this is an interesting read so far. I'll leave it at that. And thank you for the lurk. These beautiful lights, which are virtually exclusive to the polar regions, assume a variety of shapes from arcs to coronas and mainly appear in different shades of green and red. They are suggested by science to be caused by electrical particles emitted by the sun striking the atoms of the upper atmosphere. However, they have a quite different explanation within the context of the hollow earth theory. According to Albert MacDonald, an English researcher who has made a particular study of the phenomena, they are actually caused by the inner world sun. In an essay, The Hollow Earth, published in New Worlds in 1977, he wrote, quote, "Science has never come forward with a satisfactory explanation for the northern and southern polar lights. They say these magnificent skylights are possibly caused by electrical or magnetic storms at the poles. But the problem with this theory is that the electricity and magnetism do not move about haphazardly. Auroras are affected by local weather changes, and while most electrical phenomena, like lightning, are extremely noisy, they are completely silent. As far as being caused by particles from the sun, not enough are received in the upper atmosphere to cause this. Moreover, we know that such particles are mainly hydrogen, and yet very little of this has been recorded in any spectrograph analysis of auroras. It is also a fact that when viewed at either the north or south pole, they have no effect whatsoever on a compass needle. Did you start getting neck pain because I got the same issue? No, I don't have any neck pain. Not yet. Is that from shaking your head? Shaking your head at the what I'm reading? A number of people have investigated the phenomena, myself included. This is still part of the quote, sorry. Um, myself included, feel the borealis and the australis are actually a reflection from the sun in the interior of the earth. There are just too many sun like particles in the atmosphere over the poles to have come from the sun alone. The fact is that light from the inner sun is emitted through the polar openings. It bounces off the Earth's atmosphere and is reflected back down on the icy glare of the polar regions, and thus we have those unusual lights. Jan Lamprecht believes that the auroras are also linked to the Earth's geomagnetic field, which he maintains is far from stable. It it wobbles a great deal and at a high rate, and can move long distances within a short space of time, all of which, in his estimation, can be explained by the presence of the inner world sun moving around its central point. And another long quote. Quote, "The magnetic field of this sun would flow out of the earth through its holes. As this little sun wobbles around, so would the magnetic field. The magnetic current would flow out of, say, the South Pole across the surface of the earth and in through the North Pole. A compass on a ship outside would point towards the north. As you got closer to the hole, the compass would begin pointing down. If you didn't physically adjust your compass down, then it might begin spinning around. As you got deeper into the hole and reached the inner surface, you would find your compass returning to normal again. It would still point north, but that would now be south. It is important also to remember that the Earth's motion through space is not perfectly constant. In fact, the Earth speeds up and slows down in its motion. Thus, our little inner sun would wobble around like a passenger in a bus." End quote. As part of his argument, Lamprecht cites the experience of the Norwegian explorer Fridtjof, Nansen, who in 1895, while on board his ship the Fram, trying to reach the North Pole, lost his bearings and reported seeing a red sun at a time when the sun itself was known to be below the horizon. A number of other polar explorers have similarly glimpsed this mock sun in places where the sun could not possibly be. The only possible explanation, according to Lamprecht, being that it was shining through a polar opening. And we have another quote. Oh, no, 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 we don't. Sorry. Um, it is not a quote. The most obvious question the reader will ask at this point is why? If the hollow Earth really exists, these polar openings are not easily visible, or why are they not easily visible? The answer is much the same as the explanation of why the eye cannot tell the Earth is round. The curve is too gradual to observe. The gradual curve of the huge polar openings is all impossible to detect visually. Moreover, the whole area is usually obscured by thick layers of cloud which make detection difficult even for circling satellites. Note that I have used the word difficult rather than impossible, the reason for which the reader will discover later. I have a friend who's into this stuff and he is pretty insane. I, I just enjoy reading about it. I am reserving judgment. My opinion isn't important on it. On the basis of these facts, then, it is surely quite wrong to dismiss the hollow earth concept out of hand as pure hearsay and supposition. Indeed, the evidence that exists to support the actuality of the subterranean world, the stories of those who have set out to find it, men of learning and scientists, as well as eccentrics and well-meaning cranks, and the suggestions as to who might live there, add up to a substantial case and provide a constantly surprising journey through history. And that is actually the end of that chapter. Um, the next one is another 14 pages. Do I have it in me to do 14 pages? Um, yeah, I know you can entertain a idea without adopting it. Do it. He says, do it. Do it. Do it. That was my horrible impression of the Emperor. Okay, we're going to do it. We'll do chapter 2. There actually aren't that many chapters in this book, by the way. There are 12 chapters. So if we do 2 a night, I'll be done with this book in, 6 readings. So, Emperor Vesper the Enlightened. All right, here we go. Jump on into it. Chapter 2, Ancient Legends of the Hollow Void. Tory Island lies off the northwest corner of Donegal, about 7 miles from the Irish mainland. At first glance, it seems a rather desolate-looking place composed of a hard, silicious rock, of hard silicious rock with a thin covering of soil, much of which has long since been eroded by the wildness of the elements. Ugh. Yet because of its very barrenness and isolation, time seems to have stood still on Tory, and stood still for a very long time indeed. Due to the angle at which the island faces the dark, heaving Atlantic, the winds and sea are notoriously rough, and sometimes days will pass when small boats cannot make the crossing from Sheep Haven on the mainland. But those visitors who do undertake the journey often return exclaiming that Tory is more intriguing than its famous neighbor Arran, or Aran, Aran, and more steeped in ancient Irish history than many another place in Ireland. Like most of the western islands, Tory has no trees, and the side facing the Atlantic is bounded by high cliffs of naked rock which have been worn into fantastically shaped pillars or tors. It is these which give the island its name from the Irish torre, meaning an island abounding with towering rocks. Some of these pillars thrust upwards like great monoliths from a past age, while others seem as if they have been hewn by ancient craftsmen to look like signposts pointing to who knows where beyond the northern horizon. The eastern end of the island is separated from the large portion by a narrow neck and is known as the Dune, pronounced Dune, D-U-N. A number of Earthen fortifications are still visible here, and it is believed that a prehistoric fort once stood on the spot. Certainly there was a fortress in the 17th century when a group of islanders made their last stand against the forces of the English crown. As Torrey lies on the track of the North Atlantic shipping routes, wrecks have often occurred hereabouts, and the evidence is there to see in the pieces of steel, bars of iron, and variety of items from sunken ships that have been put to good use in islanders' homes. Tory Island is a place where ancient legend persists, and many stories of bygone eras are still told. The inhabitants tend to live to a ripe old age, and there are accounts of men and women seeking new partners when they were over 100 years old. In former times they even elected a king, and an ornate chair still exists which belonged to the last ruler. Many of the islanders still speak Gaelic, and it is the very survival of this language that has helped to preserve the ancient traditions passed down orally from generation to generation since time immemorial. Writing about this aspect of life on Tory Island, Professor Thomas Westrup, a member of the Royal Irish Academy and an expert on the legendary lands of the Atlantic, noted in the Society's Journal in October 1953, quote, "It is easy to understand the persistence of tradition and the spoken word in a long-living, primitive, and isolated community, and nowhere have I observed this emphasized so strongly as on Tory Island. Prehistoric myths and legends are mixed up with events of medieval history and recent happenings, and the whole jumble is narrated as if it were a single tale of the occurrences of a few years ago. The predominating figure of the mythology of the island is Balor, the chief of the Fomorians, a race of legendary marauders who inhabited the island in early times, and from their stronghold scourged the rest of Ireland with their depredations." End quote. It was a confrontation between these evil Fomorians and a mystical race called the Tuatha De Danann, I know that's not the right pronunciation, who came to Ireland from a land beyond the ocean, quote unquote. According to Robert Charroux in Lost Worlds Scientific Secrets of the Ancients, 1971, that has provided us with one of the earliest stories connected with the Hollow Earth legend. In Irish legend, the Fomorians were a, quote, misshapen and violent people, end quote, and such was their reputation that they became regarded as the evil gods of Irish myth. The most authoritative source of information about them is the Book of the Dun Cow, or Dun Cow, I guess, maybe, a manuscript written around 1090, which says their first landfall on Ireland was at Tory Island, which they made into their chief stronghold. Remnants of their occupation are still to be seen in the form of earthworks, a round tower of irregular blocks of stone, an ancient dolmen, and some inscribed stones. Once the Fomorians had secured their base, they set about attacking and enslaving the other races on the mainland. These included the Partholons, the Nemedians, and the remarkable Tuatha De Danann, who were ultimately to prove their undoing. The Partholon, the leader of the first group, Partholon, the leader of the first group, the Partholons, was a descendant of Magog, and with his people settled in Munster, where they courageously staved off the attacks of the Fomorians until wiped out by an outbreak of plague. The Nemedians, who came to Ireland from Scythia, fared no better. After years of oppression by the Fomorians, including one famous victory against the Fomorian king Conan, they were virtually exterminated by a retaliatory raid which left less than 30 Nemedians alive to flee the country forever. So they had a king named Conan. Okay. The Tuatha De Danann, I don't know why I can't say that one. Tuatha De Danann. I know that's wrong, but that's what it looks like, however, were to prove very different adversaries. There was always there has always been much speculation about the true origins of these tall, pale-skinned, handsome men and women who Irish legend believes were the people of the goddess Dana and had come to Ireland from a beauteous land in the north. Lucretius, the Roman philosopher who speculated on the origins of the universe in his work, wrote of them, quote, "For many years among the depths of the earth they led their life," end quote. While Robert Shorrow has added even more significantly, quote, "The Tuatha de Danann brought magic objects, the Nuada sword, the Lug spear, the Dagde cauldron, and the Fallstone, or Stone of Destiny, which cried out when the legitimate king sat on it," end quote. Which, by the way, is in it's in London somewhere now. It was never returned after it was stolen. Um, Found that out in the last book I read. Unlike the violent Fomorians, the Book of the Dun Cow says the Tuatha were seen as gods of light and goodness, brave and courageous fighters when the need arose. They sought to establish the same kind of peace and harmony they had enjoyed in their homeland beyond the seas. In this far-off place there were said to be 4 fabulous cities: Phalius, Gorius, Phineus, and Murius. They were clearly a unique people, and as Peter Beresford Ellis has noted in his Dictionary of Irish Mythology, 1987, quote, "When the Christian monks started to write down the sagas, these gods and goddesses were demoted into heroes and heroines, although much remained to demonstrate their godlike abilities," end quote. Having said this, the Tuatha were not entirely supermen and women. They enjoyed the normal human pursuits of happiness, pleasure, and love, and certain kinds of vice were evidently not unknown among the sexes. It was clear, too, that they possessed an intelligence far above the other people of the time, and were skilled in the use of occult powers which no one else understood. As Lady Wilde mentions in her Ancient Legends of Ireland, 1888, these Tuatha were great necromancers, skilled in all magic, and excellent in all the arts as builders, poets, and musicians. They were advanced, too, in terms of their knowledge of medicine and science. The story of Nuada, the man who became their first leader on their arrival in Ireland, bears this out. In an early skirmish with the Fomorians, one of his hands was severed by an enemy sword. Dian Kecht described, I know I butchered that, described in the old texts as a god of medicine, operated on Nuada's arm and provided a fully operational metal replacement. This artificial limb earned the leader his enduring epithet, Nuada of the Silver Hand. If there was anyone who could put a stop to the depredations of the Fomorians in their stronghold on Tory Island, it was therefore the Tuatha de Danann, who were an awesome... What? The punctuation's all messed up here. If there was anyone who could put a stop to the depredations of the Fomorians in their stronghold on Tory Island, I'm saying it was, therefore the Tuatha de Danann, who were an awesome force, according to Lady Wilde. Quote, "A splendid sight was the cavalcade of the Tuatha knights. 70 steeds, each with a jewel on his forehead, like a star, and 70 horsemen, all the sons of kings, in their green mantles fringed with gold, and golden helmets on their heads, and golden graves on their limbs, and each knight having in his hand a golden spear." End quote. The Fomorian hordes were now ruled by a man named Balor, Balor, of the Evil Eye, and had come to believe themselves invincible. Balor, in particular, glorified in his nickname given it was said, because he had a gaze so malevolent that it could destroy anyone upon whom it fell. However, he was also a deeply superstitious man, and when it was prophesied that he would be killed by his own grandson, Balor ordered the building of a crystal tower on Tory Island, in which he imprisoned his only daughter, Ethlyn, so that she might never have a child. When rumors of this beautiful prisoner reached the ears of Sian, I guess, or I don't know, the son of the Tuatha medicine man Kecht, so the legend goes, he vowed to rescue the girl. Disguised as a woman, he managed to fool the guards and reach the girl, but quickly realized he would never be able to smuggle her out of the tower. Instead, he made love to her and crept away before the dawn light broke. When Balor later heard Ethlyn was pregnant, he must have realized his worst fears were about to come true. At the famous Battle of Mag Turid, the Fomorians and the Tuatha De Danann confronted one another, and although Balor succeeded in slaying the brave Nuada, his forces were soundly beaten. As he had been foretold, Balor was afterwards slain by his grandson Lugh, and with his death, the Fomorians' reign of terror in Ireland came to an end. Interestingly, the evil ruler's name still holds a fascination in Tory Island tradition, and when a small hoard of Elizabethan silver was found in 1931 on the Dún, the woman who made the discovery was convinced it was Balor's money. For a time, Ireland enjoyed peace and prosperity under the benevolent rule of the Tuatha De Danann, until another race, the Milesians, came to challenge their authority. These people, originally from Spain, sorry, I'm going to finish this paragraph and then I'll read what just popped up there. These people, originally from Spain, were named after Milesius, meaning soldier, who was said to be able to trace his ancestry back to ancient Egypt. These men are today generally referred to in Irish history as the last group of invaders before the historical period, and the ancestors of the Guidelic Celtic inhabitants of the country. It was the four sons of Milesius, Eber, Amergin, Ir, and Colpa, who carried out the successful conquest of Ireland and the defeat of the Tuatha. At this point, our story takes on an even greater air of mystery. Okay, let me see. Somebody wrote something very long here. The surest way to penetrate the ancient occult pharmacological context is to resurrect the souls of Hippocrates and Galen, summoning them as guides through the cavernous darkness that veils the anthropological foundations of the ancient sources. Okay. According to most accounts, the surviving Tuatha De Danann were driven out of Ireland and returned to their fabulous cities in the north. Could they have been returning to their homeland inside the earth? Historians John Mitchell and Robert J.M. Rickard, in a chapter on the hollow earth in their book Phenomena, 1977, believe the possibility is inescapable. Quote, if there is any truth in the ancient myths and histories, there must once have been considerable traffic between the lower world and the upper. People moved from one to the other. We recall, for example, that according to the old Irish histories, there was once a battle between the Milesians and the magically skilled race, the Tuatha De Danann, for possession of the country. Finally, it was split between them, and the victorious Milesians taking the upper half and banishing the older race to the country below the surface. End quote. A curious 6-foot-high T cross, a tau, standing by the northern seashore is believed by some to bear mute witness to this passing. Although several authorities feel the cross is Christian in origin, a local tradition insists that it is actually of much earlier date. There are suggestions that it bears certain similarities to a type of cross found in Egypt, and thereby links this remote corner of Ireland to the desert land half a world away, which, as Eric von Däniken suggested, may have its own entranceway to the hollow earth. Certainly, there is not another like it in Ireland, and it carries three strange marks which have so far defied explanation. Beyond a theory that the cross was the handiwork of a Tuatha craftsman and the cuts are the result of an attempt by a Milesian to destroy it, which failed because it proved too hard. A final judgment on this supposition awaits further research. Another tradition claims that the Tuatha De Danann went back to their ancestral home through a large crater-like hole on the northern cliffs of Tory Island, about 50 yards wide at the top. This hole narrows considerably on the way down to the sea, which often encroaches into the lower reaches through a gap near the base of the cliffs. Perhaps not surprisingly, the islanders regard the spot with considerable trepidation, and many avoid it by night. A few have even claimed to have heard strange noises coming from the hole. Mitchell and Ricard have also written that when the Tuatha De Danann disappeared underground, quote unquote, they became demoted in the eyes of the people, and their very existence was soon being merged into the tales of Shigis, or fairies, and other mystical beings. But it is possible that these mysterious people were from the hollow earth. Some scholars have suggested that they may have been Norsemen, although there is no mention in any map of Scandinavia of the fabulous cities from which they were said to have come: Phalius, Gorius, Phineus, and Murius. Nor is there any evidence that the Norse people were as intelligent or as technically advanced, both scientifically and medically, as the Tuatha at this point in their history. But if they were from the land beyond the poles, as Hollow Earth researchers believe, then they were just the latest in a line of visitors to the surface, as Mitchell and Ricard suppose, stretching back to the very earliest times. In the old Konkan kingdom in India, that's Konkan, kingdom in India, a series of cave paintings was discovered in the last century, which is said to illustrate a tradition that dates back to prehistory. The pictures show a group of people emerging from a hollow void below the Earth's surface, and according to legend, they are the first human beings arriving from the subterranean world to begin populating the Earth. Two tribes of Native Americans also possess legends that humans originated in the subterranean world. The Mandan Indians believe they once dwelt in a single underground village near a vast lake. A grapevine extended its roots down to their habitation and gave them a view of the light above. Some of the more adventurous men and women climbed up the vine and were amazed that the sight that met their eyes, of an earth covered with buffalo and every kind of vegetation. When about half the nation had ascended this vine, a big or buxom woman who was then clambering up broke it with her weight and closed upon herself and the rest the light of the sun. Quote unquote. Among the Sioux Indians also a story is told that they once lived in a huge underworld community before making their way to the surface. The legend says their exit was hastened by a war started by an evil god who was held at bay by a group of Sioux warriors later acknowledged as the gods of good fortune by the tribe. In the East, there is a tradition that Adam himself came from a subterranean world. According to this version of the origin of mankind, Adam's home was, quote, in the middle of the earth, end quote, and his mission had been to scout the land. Hindu lore adds weight to this legend by saying that Adam was the king of a group who had fled into the hollow earth after a great cataclysm and then returned to the surface to reestablish the human race. I could see, if you believe in the hollow earth, an argument saying that the hollow earth was Eden and that when they were cast out, they were literally cast out onto the surface. Again, if you believe in the hollow earth. Where was I? To reestablish the human race. Okay. Various other ancient religious texts also speak of a world underneath the earth's crust. When, for instance, Gilgamesh, the legendary hero of the ancient Sumerian and Babylonian epics, went to visit his ancestor Utnapishtim, he descended into the bowels of the earth. It was there, too, that Orpheus traveled to seek the soul of Eurydice. Ulysses, having reached the farthermost boundaries of the Western world, offered a sacrifice so that the spirits of the ancients would rise from the depths of the earth and give him advice. In some legends, Venus is also said to have been banished to the bowels of the earth, quote unquote. Well, and also there's the story of Persephone being abducted. Is it Persephone? Abducted by Hades and taken into the underworld, and then um, her mother coming and rescuing her. Writing of this whole tradition in his Records of the Past, 1923, genealogist A.M. Sayce says, quote, "We are often told of a dwelling which the gods created for the first human beings, a dwelling in which they became great and increase in numbers, and the location of which is described in words exactly corresponding to those of Indian, Chinese, Eddaic, and Aztecan literature, namely, in the center of the earth." End quote. Do you know Ammon Hill? I had to look up that person, and I have not looked into his writings yet. I believe it's DC Ammon Hillman. Um, I'm interested enough that I am going to look into it, but I had not heard of him until you mentioned him. Interestingly, a number of such traditions state that the Earth's first civilization probably began in the far north before the ice cap froze the Arctic wastes. They record that man's ancestors appeared from quote unquote the land of the gods, the imperishable islands, and Mount Meru, an abode of light and beauty beyond the North Pole, and described in one account as quote vaguely extended to the north sky. End quote. To the people of antiquity, this region was a wondrous sacred place inhabited by magicians conjuring the destiny of mankind. Today, there is a fascinating echo of these ancient traditions in the fact that children send notes to Father Christmas in his Wonderland at the North Pole asking for gifts. Hollow Earth researchers have also pointed out a number of quotations from the Bible which they say show the concept as well known and understood at that time, especially from the books of the Ephesians, Isaiah, and Job. Most telling of all are the lines from Job, chapter 26, verse 7 through 10, which they maintain refer to the North Pole and the subterranean world that lies below. Quote, "He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. He bindeth up the waters in his thick clouds, and the cloud is not rent under them. He holdeth back the face of his throne, and spreadeth his cloud upon it. He hath encompassed the waters with bounds, until the day and night come to an end." End quote. The Greek philosopher Plato, 427 to 347 BC, was probably the first man to write at any length on the idea of an underworld. In several of his works, he mentions enormous subterranean streams and tunnels both broad and narrow in the interior of the earth. And he also discusses those who might dwell there. In one significant paragraph in Timaeus, he says, quote, "Apollo's real home is among the Hyperboreans, in a land of perpetual life, where mythology tells us two doves flying from the opposite ends of the world met in their fair region, the home of Apollo. Indeed, according to Hecataeus, Leto, the mother of Apollo, was born on an island in the Arctic Ocean far beyond the north wind. End quote. Speaking of Hyperboreans, I ran across something that I kind of decided to avoid. Apparently, there is a group that believes in the hollow earth, among other things, that also has sort of embraced Nazism um, for some reason. And so I found several books that looked like they would be very interesting until I found out about the group. I'm not going to read stuff like that on here. Um, but they were talking about Hyperborean science and Hyperborean, different things. And it sounded interesting, but I'm not going to read stuff like that on here because I it's easy enough to get yourself labeled as a Nazi just by disagreeing with somebody on something. So I'm not going to do it. Um, okay. Another remark by Plato is equally intriguing. Quote, he is the god who sits in the center on the navel of the earth, and he is the interpreter of a religion to all mankind. End quote. The hollow earth believers, the the navel of the earth, quote unquote, is to hollow earth believers, the navel of the earth, is proof positive that the great thinker believed in a subterranean world. The first man to write an entire work devoted to the concept of the hollow earth was, perhaps surprisingly, the English astronomer and mathematician Edmund Halley, 1656 to 1742. He it was who saw in 1682 the comet now named after him, and 10 years later he was appointed Astronomer Royal. Halley was a close friend of Sir Isaac Newton and discussed at length with him the latter's epoch-making Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, 1687, from which have derived the mathematical formulae that provide the basis for all modern engineering achievements. But while Halley agreed with his friend's explanations for all manner of phenomena, from the motion of planets to the fall of cannon shot, he appeared to have no answer for certain anomalies like magnetic variations. Halley had in mind particularly the fact that the world's magnetic poles, those to which compass needles point, wandered about rather than staying in place. The result of his deliberations was an article, quote, an account of the cause of the change of the variation of the magnetic needle with an hypothesis of the structure of the internal parts of the earth, end quote, published in the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London in 1692. In this lengthy work, argued with the aid of mathematics and philosophy, he suggested that the earth was not a solid body but hollow in the middle. It also contained three spheres which he said solved the problem of magnetic variations. According to Halley, all one had to assume was that the magnetic poles were really situated on one or both of the inner spheres and that they revolved on their axis at a slightly different speed from that of the Earth's outer crust. The core of Edmund Halley's argument was given in these words. Quote, the external parts of the globe may well be reckoned as the shell, and the internal as a nucleus or inner globe, included within ours with a fluid medium between, which, having the same common center and axis of diurnal rotation, may turn about the earth with our earth each 24 hours. Only this outer sphere having its turbinating motion some small matter either swifter or slower than the internal ball, and a very minute difference in length of time. By many repetitions becoming sensible, the internal parts will by degrees recede from the external, and not keeping pace with one another will appear gradually to move either eastwards or westwards by the difference of their motions. Now, supposing such an internal sphere having such a motion we shall solve the difficulty. For if this exterior shell of Earth be a magnet having its poles at a distance from the poles of diurnal rotation, and if the internal nucleus be likewise a magnet having its poles in two other places, distant also from the axis, and these latter by a gradual and slow motion change their place in respect of the external, we may give a reasonable account of the needle's variations, which till now hath been unattempted. End quote. Okay, let me go ahead. I'm at a good spot to stop because there's a picture coming up next. All that Nazi occultism and pagan revival was a continuation of the Enlightenment. Bavarian Illuminati, readings of non-Christian texts. Those late 19th century German philologists were on to the right track following Otto Kern and got the Nazi into all the ancient history. They didn't crack the code fully and still were decontextualized, but it no coincidence they flew the solar symbol of the Aryans, who changed their name to Medes after Medea, granddaughter of Helios. Okay, I follow you. The group that I was looking at is a modern group. They weren't, and they were sort of, so I would say they were kind of neo-Nazi in their thinking, and they really seemed to emphasize that in the little blurbs that I was reading. Um, Again, reserving judgment, but will not be reading it on here. Okay, so we have a picture. Edmund Halley's diagram of the hollow earth, which appeared with his article in Philosophical Transactions. So here we go. I'll show that to you. So I see it says axis here and diurna here. The rest is a little bit hard to make out. Okay, and after listing what he believes might be the reader's major objections to his theory, that no such inner globe would be able to keep its place in the center of the shell, that seawater would constantly leak in, and the constant darkness inside would make all life impossible, Halley rather lamely cites, quote, the wisdom of the Creator to provide for the macrocosm by many more ways than I can either imagine or express, end quote. He does, though, include a diagram of his vision of the hollow earth along with some mathematical figures to explain his concept. And we have another long quote. I adjoin the following scheme, wherein the earth is represented by the outward circle, and the three inward circles are made nearly proportionable to the magnitude of the planets Venus, Mars, and Mercury, all of which may be included within the globe of Earth, and all the arches more than sufficiently strong to bear their weight. The concave of each arch, which is shaded differently from the rest, I suppose to be made up of magnetical matter, and the whole to turn about the same common axis, only with this difference, that the outer sphere still moves somewhat faster than the inner. Thus the diameter of the earth being about 8,000 English miles, I allow 500 miles for the thickness of its shell, and another space of 500 miles for a medium between, capable of an immense atmosphere for the use of the globe of Venus. Venus again I give a shell of the same thickness, and leave as great a space between her concave and Mars, so likewise from Mars to Mercury, which later ball we will suppose solid and about 2,000 miles diameter. End quote. Halley concluded his paper with a challenge. Quote, thus I have showed a possibility of a much more ample creation than has hitherto been imagined, and if this seems strange to those that are unacquainted with the magnetical system, it is hoped that all such will endeavor first to inform themselves of the matter of fact, and then try if they can find out a more simple hypothesis." End quote. Sir Edmund Halley's theory of the hollow earth went into several editions and revisions during the next 30 years, suggesting that it was probably known to the literate general public, although it does not appear to have been well received by his scientific contemporaries. Most of them were more interested in his ideas about the deviations of the magnetic needle. Nonetheless, the astronomer royal, I guess, continued to defend his theory, adding a further significant comment in March 1716 after a spectacular display of the aurora borealis was seen throughout northern Europe. To Halley, this provided the answer to what illuminated the subterranean world. He wrote another paper for the Philosophical Transactions, in which he described the display in detail and offered an explanation. According to Halley, the various ideas which had been put forward by astronomers about the origin of the phenomenon were quite inadequate. He had reached the conclusion that the lights were caused by, quote, "an escape of the luminous material which gives the eternal spheres perpetual daylight," end quote. This material, he said, would naturally escape where the outer sphere was thinnest, which was, of course, the far north, for his friend Newton had just shown that the earth was flattened at the poles, and he believed the flattening was due to a thinning of the outer sphere. Although subsequently mathematicians and physicists in general dismissed Halley's statement, there was a number of other men intrigued enough by the concept to make mention of it in their own works. Among the first of these was Cotton Mather, 1663 to 1728, the New England Puritan clergyman famous for inciting the Salem witchcraft mania, who agreed wholeheartedly with the concept and repeated that Halley had written almost verbatim, or what Halley had written almost verbatim in a chapter on magnetism in his The Christian Philosopher, 1721. Quote, "We may reckon the extreme parts of our globe as a shell," he wrote, "the internal as a nucleus or an inner globe included within ours, and between these a fluid medium which, having the same common center and axis of diurnal rotation, may turn about our earth every 24 hours." End quote. In a later section, Mather stated that he was also in agreement with Halley's conclusion about the aurora borealis. Quote, "The inner medium itself may be always luminous, or the concave arch may shine with such a substance as does invest the surface of the sun, or they may have a peculiar luminaries whereof we can have no idea, but it is time to stop. We are got beyond human penetration. We have dug as far as 'tis fit any conjecture should carry us." End quote. Despite Mather's unabashed repetition of Halley's work, it is probably true to say that he helped to keep the hollow earth idea alive when later generations of readers, consulting his works for their accounts of devils, demons, and all manner of other strange manifestations, came across the relevant chapter. The prolific Swiss mathematician Leonhard Euler, 1707 to 1783, who developed new methods of solving problems in observational astronomy, later argued that if the Earth was hollow, there could only be one interior world with a central sun to provide illumination. By contrast, Sir John Leslie, 1766 to 1832, the Scottish natural philosopher and experimenter in radiation, felt this inner world more likely to have two suns revolving around a common center of gravity. He even named them Pluto, after the Greek god of the underworld, and Proserpine, the demigoddess who was his wife for half of each year. Proserpine. I said Persephone. Maybe I'm misremembering something there. Despite the comments of all these men and the public curiosity, it was to be almost a century before anyone again tackled the Hollow Earth enigma with the same dedication as Sir Edmund Halley. This time, however, the proponent was a man not merely content with expounding a theory as the astronomer Royal had done, but also an adventurer who set his heart on actually visiting the subterranean world that he was convinced lay beneath his feet. And that is the end of that chapter. And that, my dear folks, is all I'm going to be able to read tonight. My voice is about done. Um, Reading 2 chapters is nothing. Reading them out loud is a whole different animal. So we will pick up with chapter 3 and 4 the next time, which should be Tuesday. And we have another. So let me go ahead and read this. Right, that's why there is still memes of those flavors today. They want to know that esoteric occult knowledge, but don't have the linchpin to find the anthropological context in all the woo-woo seeming myth and religion, let alone the ancient Greek skills to go there. That contextualizing linchpin is largely generated by Hippocrates and Galen's more objective medical and scientific background rather than within the occult encoded language. Okay, so that was um, a response to me saying the group that I had found that was talking about the Hyperborean science and all that was a modern group. So thank you for the comments. Thank you for coming in and listening to me butchering those 2 chapters. I always enjoy having people come in. And let's see, who do we have that we could go and see? Well, if you don't mind hanging out just for a couple of minutes and giving another streamer a minute or 2 of your time, say hello if you feel like it. We're going to go on over to watch somebody play Doom. So bear with me. I will take us on over there, and I will see you there.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not lights like I've had, but more sophisticated into the